because value-wise at auction, we're going to be looking in the region of £4,000 to £6,000.
On Antiques Roadshow, appraisers have seen it all. But every so often, an ordinary item lands on their table that completely catches them off guard. Watch as cool, calm experts lose their composure, realization sets in, and a seemingly worthless piece transforms into a jaw-dropping fortune right before the owner's eyes.
Some of the most beautiful examples that I've ever seen, actually, in my career. And it's not just one piece, it's three pieces that go together. A retail price for these could be $28,000, $32,000, in that range.
Holy cow. Wow.
Here are the most shocking appraiser reactions in Antiques Roadshow history. If you love uncovering hidden treasures, hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. Inherited jewelry can sometimes preserve more than the value of gold or gemstones. It can also retain clues to a design that has changed over time. And in this case, the smallest details led the expert to realize that the story behind these pieces was far more complicated than it first appeared. The owner brought several pieces of jewelry from Germany, passed down through generations, but when the expert examined the bracelet, he quickly noticed that it was not completely original.
This is actually a brooch, but it broke, so I use it as a necklace, but I will have it repaired one day.
It's worth it, I think. They're rather fascinating, aren't they? Were they your great-grandmothers?
They were my great-grandmothers, yes, and came down to me.
From Germany?
From Germany, yes.
The expert noted that these jewelry pieces are remarkable for their use of filigree and granulation techniques common in European folk traditions. The difference in the color of the gold and the way the metal was worked suggested that the bracelet had been added later. More intriguingly, small holes in its structure suggested that an organic material had once been attached to it, something that had disappeared over time.
The bracelet itself is a later addition because the color of the gold is different and the phrasing of the metal. And yet there are holes here for stitching, or at least some kind of textile. And it's my idea that this was once a hair bracelet, that there was tightly woven lock of hair supporting this bracelet.
But the most interesting discovery was not inside the jewelry box. The expert suddenly turned his attention to the necklace the owner was wearing. The tiny gold granules across its surface revealed an example of granulation, a highly refined jewelry-making technique in which tiny metal beads are used to create patterns and texture.
But oddly enough, having opened your little Pandora's box of jewelry here, it's not the jewelry that you have in the case that's interesting me, but it's the necklace you've got round your neck. Can you take that off?
Yes.
Let's have a really good look.
The more closely he examined it, the more unusual the necklace became. It had been called a muff chain, but the expert believed that name came from an incorrect assumption about how this type of long chain was used. More importantly, its construction and characteristics allowed him to date the piece to around 1840.
And these have erroneously been called muff chains. They're not muff chains. Because they were long, it was assumed that a muff would hang on it and put your hands through it. And
then came the moment that truly surprised the owner. The other pieces of jewelry were valued at only a few £100s, but the necklace that had caught the expert's attention was worth considerably more.
And these two, fascinating as they are, they're worth low hundreds of pounds, say 350, 450 for the clasp alone, and with the bracelet, £500. But this one, put it down on your little inventory for £2,000. Surprised?
Yes.
Good.
And while this necklace was valued for its history, the next case begins in a completely different way, with a pair of earrings bought from a secondhand shop simply for a costume party. Sometimes a valuable piece of jewelry begins with a story that seems completely ordinary. In this case, the owner had traveled from Perth, Australia, carrying a pair of earrings she had bought just a few years earlier, not because she knew they were valuable, but simply because they looked perfect for a costume party. What she didn't know was that the earrings were about to be worth far more than she ever expected.
Where have you come from?
Perth, Australia.
Fantastic. So why have you come today?
I've actually come over for a family wedding, but I wanted to come to the Antiques Roadshow, so I bought some earrings that I bought 3 years ago.
The party had a theme called Op Shop Glamour, so at first these earrings were simply a stylish secondhand accessory.
Yes. I bought them for a fancy dress.
Okay, and what was the fancy dress party about?
We had to, the theme was op shop glamour.
With jewelry like this, the first question is simple. Are those stones really diamonds? They may look convincing, but appearance alone can be misleading. So the expert brought out a thermal tester, and suddenly, this casual costume party purchase was facing a much more serious test.
So, I have got one of these, which is a thermal tester, and through heat it will differentiate between paste and diamonds.
Right.
And it's going to make a series of noises.
The result immediately changed the stakes. The stones were diamonds, but that was only the first surprise. Looking closer at the earrings, the expert noticed another detail, a name engraved on the glass. And that single name could be the clue that turned an ordinary-looking pair of earrings into something much more valuable.
But if we look really closely at them, we can see that on the glass, they've got engraved on them a name. And the name on the glass is CHOPARD, French jewelers.
Suddenly, the earrings were no longer just a costume accessory. They had been identified as CHOPARD jewelry from the 1980s and 1990s, featuring diamonds and the distinctive design associated with the brand. But there was still one question left, and this was the number the owner had really come to hear.
Well, you could have probably travelled quite luxuriously on your way over here, because value-wise at auction, we're going to be looking in the region of £4,000 to £6,000.
The earrings bought almost by chance were now valued at between £4,000 and £6,000. After a discovery like that, secondhand shops might never look quite the same again. Some pieces of jewelry make an expert stop the moment they see them. And this necklace created exactly that kind of reaction at Antiques Roadshow. Passed down through Jones' family for generations, its story became even more remarkable once the expert began examining its provenance.
Am I dreaming? Am I still asleep? I was blown away. It was a very special moment.
In antique jewelry, provenance can dramatically affect how a piece is valued. A family's story becomes much stronger when it can be connected to a specific person, place, and period. And this necklace had all three.
This necklace belonged to my great-grandmother, and they came from northern New Jersey, and they actually had a house there that is locally known as Kip's Castle, and I believe the county has just taken it over as a museum.
In the portrait, your great-grandmother is wearing this particular necklace.
That portrait provided important visual evidence, showing Jones' great-grandmother actually wearing the necklace. The piece was also dated to the early 20th century, when jewelry designers increasingly explored colorful gemstones and optical effects. At its center was a black opal, prized for the shifting flashes of color that can appear across its dark body. Surrounding it were Russian demantoid garnets, an especially rare form of green garnet.
It would date it most likely between 1900 and 1908. What we have in the center is a black opal. The green stones are Russian demantoid garnets. That is the most rare form of green garnet that exists.
These rare gemstones already gave the necklace considerable value before its Tiffany connection was even considered. And that connection introduced an entirely new question. Could the piece be linked to Louis Comfort Tiffany himself?
So this was a very expensive piece when it was made. The first would be as a wonderful piece of historic jewelry. It would be $8,000 to $10,000. A Tiffany piece would be priced at $15,000 to $20,000.
A Tiffany attribution could push the value considerably higher, but proving a specific designer requires more than a similar style. Louis Comfort Tiffany was best known for stained glass, but he also influenced jewelry design during this period. Tiffany archives could not conclusively confirm the original design, leaving the attribution unproven. Still, the strong provenance and distinctive gemstones were enough to take the necklace to auction.
We could take it a step further and assign this piece to Louis Comfort Tiffany. The auction estimate on a piece like this can go as high as $30,000 to $40,000.
When the necklace reached auction in 2013, competition pushed the price far beyond the earlier estimates. The final hammer price reached $100,000. What began as a family heirloom had become a six-figure discovery, driven by its provenance, rare gemstones, Tiffany connection, and possible link to Louis Comfort Tiffany. Some family heirlooms take decades before their true value is finally understood. About 50 years earlier, when the grandmother's jewelry was placed on a table for the family to choose from, the owner only wanted one thing: diamonds. But what she received was something completely different.
But it was up to my father to choose, and he chose these. At 20 years old, I was really disappointed. I wanted the diamonds, but these are so beautiful.
At the time, she had no idea that the 3 pieces she received were exceptional examples of micro-mosaic jewelry. This technique uses countless tiny pieces of glass to create detailed images, with the finest examples requiring remarkable precision from the maker.
What you have here are micro-mosaics, some of the most beautiful examples that I've ever seen, actually, in my career.
But an even more important discovery was that these were not 3 unrelated pieces of jewelry. Together, they formed a parure, a coordinated set designed so the bracelet, brooch, and earrings worked as one unified ensemble. Having all 3 pieces survive together makes the set considerably more significant than a single surviving example.
And it's not just one piece, it's 3 pieces that go together: a brooch, earrings, and a bracelet, which together form what you might call a parure.
Another clue came from the marks of the Papal States. These marks placed the jewelry in Rome around the middle of the 19th century, during the Grand Tour, when wealthy travelers often brought micro-mosaic souvenirs home from Italy. But micro-mosaics were produced in many different levels of quality, so age and origin alone could not explain what made this set special.
It had hallmarks on it that indicated that it was from Rome. It had the Papal State marks with the St. Peter's Cross keys,
cool.
which place it around 1840, 1850. They came in all levels of quality, but these are among the best pieces of jewelry of that type that I have seen.
The difference was in the quality of the craftsmanship and the way the decorative details were finished. 2 doves were mounted in 18-karat gold, while floral motifs were incorporated throughout the design. The combination of exceptional micro-mosaic work, precious materials, a complete parure, and family provenance gave this jewelry far more significance than its appearance initially suggested. And then came the number that changed everything.
We're thinking that a retail price for these could be $28,000, $32,000, in that range.
Holy cow. Wow. Increase my insurance, yes. That's wonderful.
What makes this case memorable is not just the price, but how craftsmanship, historical marks, provenance, and the survival of an entire parure transformed what once seemed like the less desirable choice into a valuable family heirloom. Some family jewelry is kept not because anyone knows it is valuable, but simply because it once belonged to someone they loved. And this necklace began with exactly that kind of humble family story.
I believe it was my grandma's, maybe my great-grandma's. They were very poor, so they had to work with what they could find.
But the necklace itself looks nothing like its modest origins. It is a bib necklace, a style with a large decorative front that became especially popular in mid-century costume jewelry. Instead of relying on precious metals or gemstones, these pieces used rhinestones, glass cabochons, and bold colors to create maximum visual impact. And that is where this necklace starts to become much more interesting.
It's called a bib necklace. It's a fabulous necklace. It was made in the 1950s, 60s by a company that we used to call Juliana.
The name Juliana, however, is not always found directly on the jewelry itself. Collectors often identify these pieces through their design, stone settings, colors, and construction rather than a conventional maker's mark. And in this case, an important clue had already disappeared.
On the jewelry itself, it's not marked in any way, but they use paper tags, and so the paper tags were lost. About 2 or 3 years ago,
without that paper tag, the expert had to rely even more heavily on the physical details of the necklace. One of the biggest clues was the Aurora Borealis rhinestone, which has a special coating that produces shifting flashes of color as it catches the light. That coating was introduced from the 1950s onward, giving the expert another way to narrow down the necklace's production period.
These rhinestones right here, this is called a crystal Aurora Borealis rhinestone.
Okay.
and they only had that coating from the 1950s on.
Other details, including the unusual Easter egg cabochons, enormous size, and colorful arrangement, further strengthen its identity as a distinctive piece of Juliana costume jewelry. But could all those clues translate into serious collector value? That question was about to have a surprisingly specific answer.
That's right.
On a retail level, these necklaces routinely sell for between $800 and $1,000.
The retail value came in at between $800 and $1,000. That was a dramatic leap from the owner's original expectation of around $100. At first glance, this looks like a fairly ordinary object, an egg. But within minutes, the expert connects it to Cleopatra and a potential value of more than $100 million. And surprisingly, the biggest problem at the beginning is not its value, but one simple question: who actually owns it?
Well, no, this is not a family heirloom. Now, my family disowned me years ago. They don't like me. But this is more of an heirloom that my good friend at the museum lent me. He's not aware that he lent it to me.
For an ancient object, provenance does more than tell us where it came from. It can also determine whether an object can legally be sold or offered at auction. And when the potential value reaches hundreds of millions of dollars, even a gap in the ownership history can become a serious issue. But then the expert makes a claim that changes the entire story.
I recognize that this was one of the 3 gold eggs commissioned by Cleopatra at the end of her life, 30 BC. 2 of them went into public collections, and during World War II, one of them disappeared.
If authenticated, this egg would be worth far more than the value of its gold. Cleopatra VII ruled Egypt during the final period of the Ptolemaic dynasty, so any object genuinely connected to her era would require evidence covering its material, craftsmanship, dating, and provenance. And this story becomes even more intriguing because one of the 3 eggs was said to have disappeared during the war.
German soldiers had taken it to a secure hideaway, and there it remained up until recently.
But a wartime story is only a clue, not proof. Experts would need to compare collection records, old photographs, archival documents, and the chain of ownership before such a remarkable provenance could be established. That leaves 2 questions running side by side. What exactly is this object, and does the person holding it have the legal right to sell it?
This could sell for over $100 million at auction.
That is amazing.
More than $100 million completely changes how this small object is viewed. But this is a potential auction value, not a recorded sale price. Its actual market value would depend on authentication, provenance, and whether the egg could legally enter the market. And that is the paradox of this case. The greater the potential value, the more important the provenance becomes.
$100 million though, wow.
I think that there's a lot of upside.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, Lark. I appreciate that.
An object linked to Cleopatra, lost during wartime, and potentially worth more than $100 million can still look surprisingly ordinary. And that is exactly what makes discoveries like this so fascinating. Sometimes, a vintage piece is bought simply because it looks beautiful. But decades later, that beauty can turn out to be part of a much bigger story in fashion history. And this gown began with a purchase of just over $50.
Actually, my wife acquired it. We lived in Massachusetts in the mid-70s, and my wife began collecting basically lovely pieces of old clothing.
What makes the story interesting is that the seller never presented it as a rare fashion treasure. Instead, she brought out a book featuring Anna Pavlova, then revealed that she also owned the dress shown in it. That simple discovery completely changed the way the gown was seen.
On it, and she opened it up and she said, "I have this dress." And my wife said, "My God, that's gorgeous." And apparently, my wife asked her if she'd like to sell it. And the lady said yes. And my wife very quickly said, "I will buy it from you."
But its beauty was only the beginning. The expert identified it as a Fortuny DELPHOS gown, designed by Mariano Fortuny in Italy. Its most distinctive feature is the incredibly fine pleating, a technique Fortuny developed to make the fabric itself create the gown's shape rather than relying on a rigid structure. And remarkably, that pleating process has never been successfully duplicated.
Okay, you have a beautiful Fortuny DELPHOS dress which was made in Italy by Mariano Fortuny. He developed the process for this pleating, and he made these dresses from 1907 until 1949 when he passed away, and no one has been able to duplicate the pleating process.
Then came another important clue, a Fortuny signature hidden along the back seam. Combined with the distinctive pleating, design, and materials, it provided strong evidence linking the gown directly to the designer.
Fortuny signed all of his pieces.
Okay.
And this one has, it's a vertical signature in the back center seam in red lettering where it says Fortuny.
The gown is also made from China silk and features decorative cords with Venetian glass beads that help adjust the neckline and sleeves. These details show that it was more than simply a beautiful dress. It combined fashion, craftsmanship, and decorative art. And because the gown remained in remarkably good condition, its value was about to rise far beyond its original purchase price.
This dress is in really good condition.
And imagine, because the pleating is so...
No one's been able to duplicate it since he died. There's not that many to be found, and they're in great demand. The retail price on this would be $15,000 to $18,000 for this dress.
Its value comes from Mariano Fortuny's name, the unique pleating technique, the identifying signature, the materials, its condition, and the rarity of a design that has become an icon of fashion history. And perhaps most remarkably, the buyer recognized the gown's beauty long before she knew just how important it really was. Some family heirlooms preserve more than memories they can preserve a vanished world. This Russian icon carries a connection to St. Petersburg at the turn of the century, just years before the Russian Empire would disappear. And the most revealing clue is not the family story, but a tiny detail hidden on the object itself.
My grandfather and his father were in a shipping partnership, and they traveled extensively in the Baltic countries as far as St. Petersburg. There is a note with it which says, acquired from the old curiosity shop St. Petersburg.
And what date was that?
That would have been around about the turn of the century, as far as I can guess, give or take 10 years.
That timing is significant because the icon belongs to the final years of Imperial Russia, shortly before the Russian Revolution of 1917. An Orthodox icon was far more than a religious painting. It held a sacred place in Russian family life. And the silver casing surrounding it was not simply decoration.
This is a very important object in the Orthodox religion, and in a way, this silver casing is there to protect what is seen as a metaphor for heaven. It's probably come to as an enormous surprise to you that underneath this is a meticulously painted icon in full underneath here.
The object was therefore created as a complete combination of religious meaning, painted art, and fine metalwork. But the real breakthrough comes from an unexpected place: the bottom of the icon. There, the expert discovers a goldsmith's signature, Pavlov Chekhov, a figure who competed with Fabergé and favored the distinctive style known as Old Russian taste.
The old curiosity shop is something I want to return to, because I don't believe it was an old curiosity shop. I think that he went to one of the most famous goldsmiths in Russia at that time. And I know he did, as a matter of fact, because at the foot of the icon here, I can see the signature of a goldsmith called Pavel Ovchinnikov, who was a competitor of Fabergé and somebody that liked to work in the old Russian taste.
That tiny signature completely changes the story of where this icon came from. It is no longer simply a family keepsake once purchased in St. Petersburg, but an object carrying the mark of a high-level goldsmith from pre-revolutionary Russia. And with its painted icon, elaborate silver casing, and maker's signature, the piece becomes a remarkable snapshot of a vanished artistic world.
Anyway, a beautiful, beautiful relic of pre-revolutionary Russia. I think it's rather sort of awful to try to price it at all, really, because it is a holy image, and I'm going to have a go at it. I think it's worth £1,500 for insurance.
Yes, thank you.
What began as a family heirloom connected to St. Petersburg ultimately became a witness to a vanished chapter of Russian history. And sometimes that is the part of an antique that makes it truly unforgettable. Some objects are created for an ordinary daily habit, but when they become connected to the right moment in history, they can turn into witnesses to an entire era. This cigarette box was made around 1900. when the Romanov dynasty still ruled Russia and Russian decorative arts were reaching an extraordinary level of craftsmanship. But what makes it remarkable is not simply its age, it is the story behind where it came from.
Now, for those of us who think what sort of thing is this, it's a cigarette box, but this is made in around about 1900.
Comes through my family. My grandfather received it.
If the family story is accurate, the box survived one of the most turbulent periods in Russian history. Just 17 years after it was made, the Russian Revolution of 1917 brought an end to the monarchy and transformed the country completely. And on an object this small, traces of that remarkable period can still be found in its smallest details.
Well, let's have a look. It's made of silver. There's a little circular disc in the middle, and it is blue enamel decoration. And what enamel that is, because it's covered in this very smooth, almost wet, polished covering of royal blue.
Yeah.
The blue enamel gives the box its distinctive appearance, but the tiny lines beneath the surface reveal the craftsmanship behind it. These are the kinds of details found on luxury objects made in Russia during the early 20th century. But the most important clue is still waiting inside the box.
The mark on the right of that has got a little tiny monogram, which is the work of a man called Perlming.
Right.
Who was a craftsman working for FABERGÉ.
Yes.
And sure enough, on the right-hand side of that, the FABERGÉ stamp there.
This is the moment the entire story changes. The box is no longer simply a family heirloom believed to have a connection with the Tsar, but an object carrying physical marks linking it to Fabergé. And for an object more than a century old, those marks can be far more significant than family tradition alone.
Years ago, when my father first gave it to me, 35 years ago, I took it to London and had it valued, and I was told it was worth £900. That was before its damage.
35 years ago, the box was valued at £900 when it was still in perfect condition. Since then, it has suffered a small impact that left a defect in one corner. The question now is whether that damage has significantly affected the value of a genuine Fabergé object.
So what's it worth today?
No idea.
6,000 to 8,000.
No! I'm amazed. Lovely.
From £900 to £6,000 to £8,000 after several decades, the appraisal reveals the lasting appeal of Fabergé objects. And sometimes, the most ordinary-looking objects are the ones that preserve the biggest stories. Not every painting bought at a household auction comes with valuable provenance. Sometimes, a buyer simply likes the light, the colors, and the scene, and decides to take the painting home. But a familiar signature can change the story completely. With this oil painting, the name Nickel seems to suggest a connection to a well-known artist, but could it really be his work?
Brought in this oil painting. I don't know very much about it other than I bought it on a Saturday auction in summertime in North Dakota. Every Saturday there's a household auction, and I love to go to them, and bought it because I liked the use of light in the oil, luminescence, and it's a very warm sea.
The paperwork accompanying the painting mentions the name Erskine Nickel. And in the lower right corner, the word nickel seems to make that theory even more convincing. But in art appraisal, a name on a canvas is never the final proof.
When you brought it to us, you had a sheet of paper that referenced the painting and mentioned the artist Erskine Nickel. And on the front in the lower right here, we see the word nickel.
Erskine Nickel was a 19th century Scottish artist known for figurative works and landscapes. If this painting were genuinely his, its value could reach into the thousands of dollars. But the expert quickly notices a problem. The painting itself appears to belong to a much later period.
When I look at this painting, I don't think that this painting is by Erskine Nickel. It's an interesting painting, it's a decorative painting. What makes me say that? Erskine Nickel was an artist from Scotland.
So what clue could settle the question? Instead of relying only on style, the expert examines the canvas and the back of the painting. And one seemingly unrelated detail provides an important clue about its age.
But as we look at this painting, both in terms of the style, subject matter, the way it's signed here in the lower right, and if we look at the canvas, both front and back, this is a 20th century painting. And when we look at the label on the back, the W.T. Berger Company was a company founded in the 20th century in the 40s in Indiana.
That conclusion almost rules out the possibility that this is an original work by Erskine Nicol. But that does not mean the painting is fake. It remains an original oil painting with its original frame. The artist was simply more likely to be someone else named Nicol.
It's an original oil painting, handsomely framed. The original frame, the original cloth liner. If I had to date the painting, I would probably say the third quarter of the 20th century.
And then comes the final question. How much did the buyer actually pay? $150 to $200 is a small price compared with the thousands an authentic Erskine Nicol could command. But the expert suggests that even today, the painting would probably be worth around what the buyer originally paid.